Hello guys, today the topic we will be discussing in this video is culture influence in bilingual speakers. Our topic arises from the article called What Bilinguals Tells Us About Culture, Cognition and Language by Judy Kroll and Rhonda McLean. The topic that we will be addressing is based on the question, how can L2 culture influence in bilingual speech production? According to Shang, 2013, he states that when bilinguals are immersed in an English-speaking country, they feel more comfortable talking to English native speakers than to their L1 peers. This is explained in terms of cultural cues such as faces or other features that make a stronger connection and activation of L1 than of L2. In other words, when we see familiar faces to our culture when speaking English, L1 is rapidly activated, causing interference with our L2. Our next section is gonna be led by two questions based on our personal experiences. The first question is, how do you feel when you have to produce the language in front of native speakers and non-native speakers of English? And number two, to what extent do you think your language production is affected by the surrounding culture and context?
Regarding the two previous questions, I can say that every time that I have to use or produce my L2 language knowledge, English, I feel happy and nervous at the same time. On one hand, when the language is used in front of a non-native speaker, like my coworker or professors of the university, whose first language is not English, my language production is very limited and sometimes lacks of meaning. I believe this occurs due to the fact that, as they are professional of the area, they might judge my English and at some point make comments that will disturb me. I definitely believe that this is part of the culture where I live, since in my city people love to judge you a lot, especially if you're not doing a great job. On the other hand, when I have the opportunity to interact with native speakers, I feel 100% sure of using my English. It is possible because I feel like a strong connection with them. Also because native speakers' culture is less judgy and they will never tell you if you make a mistake in the use of the language. Instead, they will say your English is good, and those are words that increase your confidence.
My point of view about this issue is that when I speak English with people who are Spanish speakers, I tend to use more words in Spanish because I know they will be able to understand. This happens because the topics we discuss are related to our culture and our L1 interference occurs resulting in Spanglish. For example, when I don't know a word in English, I can substitute it with its Spanglish equivalent. Thus, I don't interrupt the communicational exchange.
Well, in my case, as per the two previously mentioned questions, some years ago I worked as a legal interpreter in an office assisting foreign and Ecuadorian customers. I remember feeling more comfortable using L2 when talking to foreign people than with Ecuadorian people during our company meetings. Talking to foreigners made me feel more confident when producing my L2 speech than my L1 peers because I felt that foreigners motivated me to use English more accurately.
My personal experience when I speak English, I usually feel more comfortable when speaking to my culture peers than English native speakers since I feel more pressure set on me. Consequently, I usually try harder to convey my message accurately when interacting with English native speakers, having a better performance compared to talking to my L1 speakers. And this is because in L1 I have the option to use Spanish as well.
Now it is time to talk about culture and language. As a brief introduction, we can say that we live in a multicultural world, a world that combines different language and cultures. Language and culture are intrinsically connected, and they are the keys to transmit ideas, customs, and beliefs of societies. What is more, culture and languages are the doors for the creation of words. Now, what is culture? Culture is defined by H. Douglas Brown as a context within which we exist, think, feel, and relate to others. It is the glue that blends a group of people together. It means that every culture has its own way of identification, such as customs, beliefs, and ideas that are accepted and interpreted according to the place they belong.
On the other hand, it is relevant to point out that language and culture are intrinsically connected. Through language, people communicate, in a way, values, beliefs, and ideas of a culture. In accordance with Crouch, language is the principal means whereby we conduct our social lives. When it is used in context of communications, it is bound up with culture in multiple and complex ways. Therefore, language is a system of signs that is seen as having itself a cultural value. Speakers identify themselves and others through the use of their languages, which is seen as a symbol of their social identity.
In order to understand the dynamics between culture and language, we're going to review the term bilingualism. According to Ramirez and Garcia in their bilingual brain study, they defined the term as the ability of an individual to speak two languages. Lalé establishes that the available evidence indicates that L1 and L2 are processed by the same neural devices, and the neural differences in L1 and L2 representations are only related to the specific computational demands, which vary according to the age of acquisition, the degree of mastery, and the level of exposure to each language.
With respect to L2 acquisition, when this takes place in an early age, it is more procedural than declarative, since this process of acquisition is unconscious and natural. Also, it occurs through the temporal lobe and then proceeds to the frontal lobe to produce speech through the Broca's area. On the contrary, late bilinguals learn an L2 in a conscious manner, hence using declarative memory. This process goes from the frontal lobe to the temporal lobe.
Neuroscience and second language acquisition. If we know that we radically filter out sounds unused in L1 by the age of 8 months, it brings into question how second languages can be acquired beyond this critical stage. This is because purely from a pronunciation standpoint, phonemes and prosodic features of language other than L1 ought to be near to impossible to produce, as our brains have eliminated our attention to language outside L1 before we reach 1 year old. However, we have learned that our brains are not fixed. The plasticity in the brain allows for lifelong learning. The brain has an ability to expand its learning capacity. Patricia Cull reminds us that there are fixed set of wires in the brain that new synapses are created over as we intake and process new information. The brain has a dynamical property that can interact with itself.
Working relation between language and culture. As quoted in tongue, for bilingual students, two languages and backgrounds can create what Simons describes as cultural tension and conflict stemming from new experiences in an unfamiliar environment. A central point in the discussion of biculturalism is the way first and second languages are used, and especially how, Mayra claims, their usage reveals the thinking of individuals regarding their ethic preferences and values. Research suggests that bilinguals switch personality when they switch languages in a way that is consistent with the culture associated with each language. However, the relation is not simple. When bilinguals are immersed in a language, cultural values associated with that language are activated, which influences response to self-reports. According to Virginia, as educators, we need to appreciate not only our students' native culture and language, but also how and why their educational background may influence their second language interpretation, acquisition, and production.
Pedagogical implications. In the classroom, the teacher needs to be aware of cultural diversity and then promote the learning process involving differences to create understanding of cultures and build L2 knowledge. Also, it is important to pick up the value of other cultures by being represented in class materials. Consequently, the process of acculturation becomes smooth and doesn't imply losing one's culture, but rather learning of a new culture to function in both language cultures. For example, teachers might apply different strategies and methods, such as role plays where students can perform several characters and experience language from a variety of cultural backgrounds.
Also, using authentic sources from the native speech community helps to engage students in authentic cultural experiences. Sources can include films, news broadcasts, television shows, websites, photographs, magazines, newspapers, restaurant menus, travel brochures, and other printed materials. Teachers can adapt their use of authentic materials to suit the age and language proficiency level of the students. Teachers have to expose students to real language use through meetings with native speakers or have students in immersion programs of English. In this way, the students' brains absorb and reproduce speech patterns and body language. This is beneficial because students rehearse and internalize the information.
In conclusion, learning a second language goes beyond the learning of rules. It also includes acculturation so that non-native speakers become both linguistically and pragmatically accurate when interacting with other speakers, and in this case, in the English language.
Over the rainbow, way